Well, hello, everybody. This is Mitch Weisberg. I'm here with MindShifting Monday with Mitch. And before we go into the today's topic, I do want to take a quick moment to mention that this session was originally going to be myself and Josh Chernikov. Josh and I were going to be talking about schools. And unfortunately, Josh found out last week that he needed open heart surgery, and the surgery actually took place this past Friday, May 1st. I know that the surgery was successful. Josh has been sending out memes. Um, so I also know that he's on the mend. And I have it on good authority that the surgeons did confirm that, yes, Josh actually does have a heart. So if you're connected with him on LinkedIn or Facebook or WhatsApp or email, I'm sure that he'd love to hear from you. But just in terms of today, I'm going to be flying solo, and we have a lot of vital information to cover. Today, we're going to be speaking directly to school and district administrators, the principals, if you're superintendent, the education influencers, all of you who are trying to lead in an incredibly turbulent time. And as we all know, you can walk into almost any school or district today, or district office, and you can feel it immediately. You can feel the tension, the fatigue, the burnout, the short fuses. Parents are terrified about their kids' futures and they're coming in hot. Teachers are burned out from accountability pressures and new AI threats. Students are dealing with severe trauma and acting out. The superintendents are dealing with budgets and taxpayers and state governments. The pressure cooker is whistling. Okay, and as teachers, as leaders, we're desperately trying to keep the lid on. So, let me ask you, those of you who are able to chat, let me ask you, when you walk the halls of your building, where do you feel the most heat? Is it staff exhaustion? Is it parent complaints? Is it student behavior? So maybe you can let me know in the chat, and I'm going to click on chat here so that I don't miss. But I know that as I talk to superintendents, principals, and educators, uh, there's not one of those areas that surfaces as the only one. Everybody's feeling it from all these different directions. Because I work with, um, hundreds of educators and administrators every year, I do get to hear firsthand what's really causing that heat. Our recent mind shifting classes over the last year or so, we have the participants reflect on what are the issues that they're facing, and so in the courses we can deal with those issues and we can, help them overcome obstacles. So I've been asking educators to tell me the specific conflicts that they're dealing with every day. So here are some of the things that come up, over and over again, repetitively. Student apathy and dysregulation. Students completely shutting down, refusing to do assignments, or displaying extreme dysregulation when faced with a challenge. Systemic cell phone battles, the endless daily conflict of trying to keep students off their screens and focused on instruction. Parent conflicts, teachers and counselors being on the receiving end of unjust criticism, hostile emails, or defensive parents in IEP meetings. Staff and admin friction, deep divides over top-down mandates, a lack of support, or schedule changes that make teachers feel like their voices aren't heard. So, hearing that list, apathy, cell phones, angry parents, staff friction, you know, what are your thoughts as you hear that list? Are any of them specifically draining energy from your schools or districts? And what are you doing about them? I'd love to hear that, and maybe you can type a few examples into the chat as well. And in the meantime, we can dive deeper into a few of the responses from from the educators and the participants who have been taking the courses. Counselors reported spending significant time mediating conversations with students struggling with changing friend groups and relational conflicts. We heard about unprofessional colleague behavior. Educators cited issues with colleagues undermining joint decisions, dominating PLC meetings, or sending urgent, stressful work emails late at night. They talked about the unjust criticism. Teachers and counselors are often on the receiving end of defensive or hostile communications from parents who blame the school or blame their teacher or blame the counselor for their child's poor grades or poor behavior. We saw IEP and accommodation disputes, high stress conflicts occurring during IEP meetings when parents demand one on one aids or special services that the school team doesn't believe are warranted or appropriate or that they just don't have or don't have the budget for. We heard about teacher burnout, educators feeling overwhelmed by the pressure of acting as both teachers and counselors for students experience trauma or ACEs, or what we call, adverse childhood experiences. We read about dysregulation and aggression. Educators reported dealing with dysregulated students who experience meltdowns, throw objects, or run away from the classroom, or become physically aggressive towards staff and peers. And here's one that everyone, especially you administrators, is just too familiar with, budget cuts and job insecurity, financial constraints that lead to reduction in force or RAF notices, shuffling staff to new positions, and chronic shortages of paraeducators. As I'm going through this list, I'm thinking like, doesn't it make us wonder why we chose education as our profession, right? As leaders, when we see these issues, our instinct is to solve them immediately. We look for that one solution, which is going to, you know, eradicate a particular problem and allow us to move forward and educate the kids, which is why we all got into education in the first place. But we generally try to solve each one using interventions that never actually work because we keep on making the same mistakes. We issue a new cell phone ban, or we call for a stricter punishment matrix, or we give some other top down mandate. And I call this the weed whacker approach. And you chop down the top of the dandelion. It looks good for a day, but the root is still there. And the dandelion grows right back, just as these conflicts grow back, maybe manifesting as a different conflict, but it's the same root. Why do we keep doing this? It's because and our survival brain has this desperate need for certainty. And that traps us into these types of interventions that don't actually solve the issue. When teachers feel mandated to do things without any agency, or when parents feel threatened, or when kids feel threatened, their survival brains take over. They literally lose access to the part of their brain that handles empathy, collaboration, and critical thinking. And so you end up with the culture of mock compliance or deep resentment or endless conflict. So if that weed whacker or whack a mole approach traps us into a survival brain conflict loop, what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is actually learning how to take a step back and pause, taking a step back into the resourceful, critical thinking part of our brains. And let's look at what happens when educators actually use these tools to solve these uh, education or adult conflicts. So, one educator reported in one of our cohorts, she admitted that whenever she faced a disagreement, her first instinct was to argue her case to win. But in the course, when she started to learn to recognize her survival brain, she learned to pause. And what she said was, instead of responding immediately, I slow down. This pause alone has significantly changed the tone and how effective I am with these types of interactions. And what about those unjustly critical parents we mentioned earlier? One secondary music teacher uh, talked to us about how she got incredibly defensive and stressed whenever she received accusatory emails from parents. And that made her default to this compete style where she would argue that this is right, no, and you should be doing this, and your child should be doing that. Through the course, she learned to stay in in her resourceful brain. And that prompted her to start validating the parents' underlying needs instead of reacting to the actual words that they say. By validating the parents' underlying needs instead of fighting them, the conflict dissolved and the hostility ended in seconds. And then the two sides could proceed with what the problem was that the child was not doing as well as the child was capable of. So we've got staff collaborating instead of fighting, and educators diffusing angry parents. Let's talk about students. What happens when teachers stop using top down punishments and use their resourceful brain to boost student outcomes instead? So, we're talking to one elementary teacher, and she worked with adaptive and social communication students. These were kids who would completely shut down and default to, I can't. Now, her old response was to react emotionally, but she learned to use mindfulness to manage her own reactivity. And then, by staying resourceful, she started role playing conflict resolution with her students outside of their fight or flight state. This role playing helped students recognize that not all stress is bad, and it empowered them to actually work through their challenges instead of freezing. Or we had one special education teacher named Suzanne, and she deals with teens who are constantly stressed and resistant. Instead of telling the kids what to do, which triggers their fight or flight resistance, she started using curiosity based questioning to put the students at the center of the conversation. She said the results were revolutionary because what it did is it empowered the kids to sit in the driver's seat of their own learning. And when you scale that type of interaction across a whole school or across a whole district, student achievement naturally rises because the students take ownership. So if you're a superintendent or a district leader and you're listening to this, you probably want this type of transformation in your schools tomorrow. And it's not like it's going to happen tomorrow or in one day, but it is going to happen through a process. And that process is exactly why we put together a free special masterclass, which is going to be happening on Wednesday, May 13th at 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern. The masterclass is called The Three Biggest Mistakes Districts Make When Trying to Improve Student Outcomes. And in this 60-minute session, we're going to pull back the curtain and reveal exactly what those three mistakes are. But probably more importantly, we're going to hand you the three secrets to building a resilient, collaborative school or district from the inside out. We're going to cover the brain science of how you can get your staff to outlearn obstacles and to transform daily conflicts into opportunities. So, if you're an education leader, you know that you can't wait until the middle of next year to start trying to fix the burnout and conflict. You need to set the pace at the beginning of the year. And so that's why I'd encourage you um, to go to the landing page now on the QR code. Head over there and register for the May 13th class. The May 13th class will give you the types of things that you can do over the summer so that when you start the school year next August or September, you're going to start it running and ready to be a collaborative learning environment. And then I also have a pretty good bonus for anybody who registers today. When you bonus, well, sorry, when you register, okay, you'll instantly receive the free 30-second conflict de-escalator guide. Now, as leaders, we're constantly dealing with conflict, right? We tell somebody something and they resist us, so they start giving us reasons why, and we have our natural reaction. The 30-second conflict de-escalator guide gives you, the tools that within 30 seconds to turn that conflict into away from something that's going to uh, you know result in uh, suboptimal behavior, and it's going to turn the conflict into an opportunity to work together to come up with something, or to work together on doing something that actually is going to make a difference. So this is a quick actionable tool you can use the very next time you have a student, a parent, a colleague, or a teacher. The next time you feel yourself slipping into fight or flight, it's designed to help you turn destructive conflict into conversations that lead to better outcomes for your students, your team, and you. And you'll be able to download it free when you register. It's called, so you'll get a free masterclass, and you get a free 30-second conflict de escalator guide. So it's kind of a no brainer, right, for any school teacher. So I want to, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you use the QR code to join us in the masterclass. Uh, and please keep Josh in your thoughts. Uh, and I hope to see you on the May 13th masterclass. And then next Monday, what we're going to be talking about is why good advice often escalates into conflict, which is another really interesting subject. So, hope to see you all May 13th, or next Monday, or at some other Mind Shifting Monday with Mitch. And this is Mitch Weisberg signing off. Uh, Talk to you soon.